The sky had forgotten mercy that night as thunder cracked above rusted rooftops. Little Eli, curled up beneath a plastic sheet near the market dumpster, shivered like a leaf in a storm. He hadn't eaten in 2 days, yet he offered half a stale bun to a stray puppy with bigger ribs than him. His eyes, wide and glassy, watched the world not with hate, but with a quiet kind of hope. Eli didn't beg loudly like the others. He just sat near the bakery corner, eyes low, hands still, waiting. For kindness that rarely came. No one ever asked his name. No one ever wondered what his dreams were. At night, he whispered to the stars, asking if someone out there could hear him. "Please," he once said, "I don't want riches. I just want to matter." Miles away, Clara Whitmore sat like a porcelain doll in her silk wheelchair. Her legs didn't listen to her anymore, and neither did her smile. Doctors called her a miracle for surviving the crash, but Clara didn't feel like a miracle. She felt like a ghost in a castle. Her father, Jonathan Whitmore, could buy empires, but not her happiness. He watched her slip further into silence each day, helpless against the weight of her sadness. Until one strange morning, Clara noticed a bouncy boy sitting by the iron gate of their mansion. He didn't speak. He just stared at her like he knew she was drowning inside. Eli didn't blink. His stare wasn't rude. It was filled with something else. Something pure. The guards told him to leave, called him filthy, threw stones near his feet. But the next day he returned, and the day after that, always watching, always waiting. Clara felt something unfamiliar inside. Curiosity, maybe even comfort. She asked her nurse, "Who is that boy?" The nurse just scoffed. "Nobody. He's a street kid, probably wants food." But Clara's voice grew firmer. "Then feed him." That day, for the first time in months, she looked away from her reflection. Jonathan Whitmore noticed his daughter's interest and frowned. "We don't mix with them," he muttered. But Clara whispered under her breath, "Maybe we should." Eli didn't know he was changing a life. He was just following a feeling. Like something invisible was pulling him toward her pain. And as fate would have it, that invisible thread was about to tie two shattered worlds together in the most unbelievable way. The days blurred together for Eli. Each morning he woke with a new hunger gnawing at his insides, but never a thought for himself. He was a shadow, existing only to give, never taking. And for some reason, it was enough for him. His shoes were a faded memory, his jacket a patchwork of years. Yet there was something in Eli's eyes that shone brighter than any fortune. His innocence was pure, like a river before it's tainted by the world. He wasn't afraid of the rain. He danced in it, laughing with the puppy, the only creature that understood his silent conversations. The city's streets were cold, but Eli's heart was warmer than anyone could have guessed. As the world rushed past, too busy to notice the lives being broken beneath its feet, Eli found joy in the smallest things. He didn't complain when he was cold. He didn't cry when he went hungry. He didn't even ask for help. He gave what he could to those even worse off than him. Every penny, every scrap of food, he made sure none went to waste. His eyes were the only thing that spoke, deep, soulful eyes that saw the world not for what it was, but for what it could be. And Clara, locked in her golden cage, noticed. She was used to pity, people feeling sorry for her when they saw her in that chair. But Eli didn't look at her with pity. He didn't look at her as broken, as someone to be healed. No. Eli saw her as someone who could be whole again, even without knowing how. Every day he appeared outside her mansion, not asking for anything. His presence alone was a silent plea for her to see him, to understand him. Clara, behind the glass windows, couldn't ignore it. The girl who once danced through fields of sunflowers now sat motionless, waiting for something to change. But she didn't know how. She had spent so many months asking, "Why me?" And now, standing there watching Eli, a question began to form in her mind. Why not me? She didn't know what it was, but Eli's presence felt like a whisper of hope in her heart. A small, fragile hope, like the first ray of sunlight, after a long, cold night. In the silence of her room, Clara finally spoke out loud, her voice barely above a whisper. Maybe I can walk again. No one believed in her anymore. No doctor, no therapist, not even her own father. They had all given up on her recovery. But Eli, this little beggar with no future, gave her the one thing she needed most: belief. Eli didn't know how to fix things. He didn't know the science, the medicine, or even the miracle cure. But he had something more powerful: the innocence of a child who still believed in the impossible. Clara's heart, hardened by months of suffering, began to soften. It was in the way he held her gaze when no one else dared look at her for too long. It was in the way he didn't see a crippled woman but just another human soul, broken and in need of love. As Clara watched Eli day after day, something inside her began to stir. Something she hadn't felt in months. Guilt. It wasn't the guilt that came from what she had lost, but the guilt of what she had never truly appreciated. She had always been the girl with everything: wealth, power, influence. People used to admire her, touch her shoulder gently, and tell her how lucky she was, how beautiful she was. But beauty and wealth felt hollow now. A body that couldn't move, a soul locked in a cage of silk and gold. It was empty. Clara felt a deep ache in her chest, a growing awareness that her past self had been so selfish, so blinded by entitlement, that she never once understood the value of struggle, or the courage it took to smile when life gave you nothing but pain. She thought of the countless times she had complained about her condition, the endless days she spent sulking in her room, begging for someone to make her better. But Eli had nothing to give. No money, no education, no future. He was a boy who had been abandoned by the world. Yet, he never asked for anything. He gave. He shared his small joys, his hopes, and most of all, his heart. It was a heart full of kindness, untainted by bitterness. One evening, Clara watched him from the window again, she realized something that stung deep. Eli was more alive than she had ever been, not physically, but in spirit. His energy was infectious. His will to survive, to help others, was a force she had never seen before. Why am I sitting here? She whispered to herself. Why am I waiting for someone to fix me when there's someone out there who needs me? The realization hit her like a tidal wave. Her own selfishness had kept her trapped. Her misery was a prison, and she had the key all along. Eli didn't ask her to heal him or fix him, but his quiet strength was enough to make her see the truth. Life isn't about receiving. It's about giving. Suddenly, Clara knew what she had to do. She called for her father, Jonathan Whitmore, the man who had tried to shelter her from the world, trying to protect her from the very pain that had now become her cage. Father, she said, her voice trembling with the weight of her decision. I need you to stop treating me like I'm broken. Jonathan frowned, his eyes narrowing. What do you mean, Clara? You are broken. I'm not. She interrupted, cutting him off. I'm not some delicate porcelain doll. I can still feel. I can still love. I can still fight. Her voice shook, but Clara stood tall in that moment, taller than she had in years. Her father took a step back. He had never heard his daughter speak like this, not in the years since the accident. But Clara wasn't the same girl anymore. She had woken up from the numbness that had plagued her for so long. I want to help Eli, Clara said firmly. I want to teach him. Teach us both to live again. I want to get out of this chair. Jonathan looked at her, his eyes softening. He had always wanted to protect her, but now he saw something else. Strength. You're not alone, Clara. We'll find a way, he said, his voice cracking for the first time in years. But Clara's eyes sparkled with newfound fire. No, Father. I'm not waiting anymore. It's time I started living for myself. It wasn't just a physical healing Clara needed, it was a moral awakening. She realized her journey wasn't about waiting for a miracle. It was about embracing the strength inside her that had always been there. And Eli? He didn't know it, but he had already given her the greatest gift of all, the ability to see beyond her suffering, to see the world through the eyes of someone who hadn't given up, someone who still believed that good things could come from the hardest battles. The sun was setting, casting a warm orange glow over the small town. Clara sat in her wheelchair, staring at the horizon through the window of her father's mansion. For years, the view had seemed distant, like a dream she could never reach. But today, there was something different in her heart, a flicker of hope, a fire that had reignited within her. As the last of the light faded from the sky, she heard a soft knock on the door. "Come in," she called, her voice steady but with a tinge of nervousness. Eli stepped inside, his usual wide smile brightening the room. His eyes sparkled with that same innocence, his energy contagious. He was holding a small box in his hands, wrapped carefully with a red ribbon. Clara smiled, but it was the kind of smile that came from a place of genuine warmth. She wasn't the woman she had been when Eli first found her. The sadness, the bitterness, it was all gone now. She had found her strength. "Eli," she said softly, her voice almost trembling with emotion. "What's this?" Eli stepped forward, carefully placing the box in her lap. He looked at her with his big, hopeful eyes, his voice full of sincerity. "It's for you, Clara. I know you're healing, and I want you to have this. To remind you that you can walk again. You're not broken." Clara's eyes widened, and for a moment she was speechless. The words hit her like a wave, crashing over her with overwhelming emotion. She felt the depth of Eli's understanding. He saw her, not as a woman trapped in a chair, but as someone capable of so much more. Slowly, she unwrapped the box, her heart racing. Inside, nestled gently in the tissue paper, was a small, delicate bracelet, the kind with a charm shaped like a butterfly. It was simple but beautiful, its wings catching the light. "What's this?" Clara whispered, her throat tight with emotion. Eli smiled softly. "A butterfly represents freedom. It's the kind of freedom I know you'll find, Clara. The kind that comes from within. The freedom to move, to live, to heal." Tears filled Clara's eyes as she looked at the bracelet, then at Eli. The boy who had once been nothing but a street kid with nothing to give had become her greatest teacher, her guide through the darkness she had lived in for so long. She reached out and gently took the bracelet, the weight of its meaning settling in her chest. This wasn't just a gift. It was a promise that she could heal, that she wasn't alone anymore. "You don't know how much this means to me, Eli," Clara whispered, her voice breaking. "You've shown me a way out. You've shown me that I can still fly." Eli's smile grew wider, and for the first time in months, Clara felt a spark of joy in her heart. The joy of knowing that no matter how hard life had been, there was still beauty to be found, still love to give, and still a chance for redemption. But Eli wasn't done. He reached out and gently placed his hand on hers, his touch warm and reassuring. "Clara," he said, his voice full of hope, "I know you can walk again. Not just with your legs, but with your heart. You're already walking. Every step you take is a step toward who you really are." Clara looked at him, her heart swelling with emotions she hadn't allowed herself to feel in so long. This was it. Her moment of transformation. The moment when everything changed, not just for her, but for Eli too. In that instant, Clara realized that she had been living in fear for too long. Fear of the world, of her future, of the unknown. But now, with Eli's gift, she understood something crucial. The greatest healing comes from within. Tears flowed freely from her eyes as she whispered the words that had been waiting to be spoken for so long. "Thank you, Eli. I won't let you down. I will walk again." Eli's eyes glistened with unshed tears as he nodded, a silent understanding passing between them. They didn't need words to know the truth. Clara had found the courage to live again, and in doing so, she had given Eli a gift, too. In that moment, their bond was unbreakable. Clara had always known that her family had money, power, and influence, but those things never brought her happiness. She had spent years of her life in a gilded cage, trying to fill the emptiness that came with her condition. The mansion, the wealth, it all felt like a shadow of what she truly needed. She had dreamed of standing on her own, of making choices, of living freely. But now, in the quiet moments of her healing, Clara realized something that cut deeper than anything physical. She had never understood what true sacrifice was until she met Eli, the boy who had nothing to give except his heart. He had sacrificed his own childhood, his dreams, his hopes, to care for her in ways no one else had. When she was at her lowest, when the pain of her paralysis had crushed her spirit, Eli was there, not with grand gestures or promises of healing, but with quiet, consistent love. Every morning he would show up, never asking for anything in return. He would sit with her for hours, never once complaining about the weight of his responsibilities. His sacrifice wasn't something he spoke of, it was in the way he cared. For her, the way he chose to be there for her every single day. But what Clara didn't know, what no one knew, was that Eli had been sacrificing something far deeper, something he couldn't even begin to articulate. In the weeks that followed, Eli's presence became a lifeline for Clara. But one day, she noticed something. His eyes seemed a little more distant, a little more tired than usual. He wasn't as talkative. His once bright energy seemed to dim slightly, and Clara noticed it the most in the little moments. When he didn't joke around, when his smile didn't reach his eyes, when his hands trembled slightly as he helped her with her daily exercises. "Are you okay?" Clara had asked him one evening after he'd stayed unusually quiet, watching the sunset from the window. His eyes met hers, and for the first time she saw something she had never seen in him before. Guilt. "I'm fine," he'd said, his voice soft, but there was something in the way he said it, the way he turned away so quickly. Clara could feel it, but she didn't push him. She had learned over time that Eli had always hidden his pain in silence. What Clara didn't realize was that Eli had been working 2 jobs, not just to help his family, but to save up for the surgery he believed would help her walk again. Every spare minute he had was spent working, not for himself, but for her. And the toll it was taking on his body was beginning to show. The sacrifice was quiet, but it was real. It wasn't the dramatic moments where people would cheer for him. It was in the small, unseen acts. He had barely slept for days, had gone without food, and had even sold his most cherished possession, his guitar, to fund the treatments that would give Clara a chance at a normal life. One evening, Clara came across Eli in the living room, his head buried in his hands. She thought he was asleep, but the sound of his heavy breathing told her otherwise. She knew the toll the days had taken on him, but this was different. This was something deeper. "Eli, what's going on?" Clara asked softly, her heart aching as she knelt beside him. Eli didn't speak at first. He was silent, and in his silence, Clara felt something break within him. When he finally looked at her, his eyes were filled with unshed tears, but the only thing he could manage to say was, "I don't have anything left for myself anymore. I've given it all to you, Clara, and I would do it again. But I don't want you to see me like this." Clara's heart shattered, and she reached for him, pulling him into a warm, silent embrace. She knew, in that moment, what he had done for her. The weight of his sacrifices, his silent suffering, hit her with a force she could never have imagined. He had given up everything for her, his dreams, his well-being, his joy, and never once had he asked for anything in return. And that's when Clara made a decision. The very next morning, Clara insisted on training harder, pushing herself past the limits she had set for herself. She would not let Eli's sacrifice go to waste. She would not let him believe for one more second that he had given everything for nothing. She began to fight with everything she had. Every exercise, every step, every moment, she poured her soul into it. Her eyes were focused, determined. She could feel the weight of Eli's sacrifice in every breath she took. It became her fuel. She knew that she would make it. Not just for herself, but for Eli. She would repay him by becoming whole again, by healing, by giving him back his life, the life he had sacrificed for hers. But Eli would never know how hard she pushed herself. She would never tell him of her decision, because like him, she understood that some sacrifices were never meant to be acknowledged. They were meant to be felt. And in that feeling, a deep bond was formed, one that words could never capture. The silent sacrifice of both Clara and Eli would become the foundation of their healing, a quiet strength that no one could take from them. Clara had never known the true meaning of strength until she met Eli. At first, she had been the one needing protection, the one needing care. Paralyzed from the waist down, every day had been a struggle, a battle against her own body, a battle against the world that didn't seem to have any place for people like her. She had felt small and fragile, a delicate thing that everyone around her pitied. But then Eli had come into her life, and with him, something had changed. His strength, though humble, had become her anchor. He had shown her that even in the darkest times, there was a reason to keep moving forward. But now, Clara felt the shift within her. It wasn't a sudden change, but it was a realization that grew stronger with every passing day. Eli, her savior, the boy who had sacrificed everything for her, who had given up his own dreams to care for her, was the one who now needed protecting. In the weeks following their shared emotional bond, Clara began to notice how fragile Eli had become. It wasn't obvious at first, not to anyone but her. He'd always been the one to show up with a smile, no matter the weight he carried on his shoulders. But Clara could see it. She could see the exhaustion in his eyes, the toll his silent His once joyful laughter had become more forced. His hands, so steady when they helped her through the hardest of exercises, now trembled slightly with every touch. And most painfully of all, Clara saw the guilt that had taken root in Eli's heart. He felt responsible for her suffering, for the time and energy he had poured into her recovery, believing that somehow his sacrifices weren't enough, that he was failing her. This, Clara decided, was not something she could let happen. One night, as Eli fell asleep in a chair beside her hospital bed, his face etched with the exhaustion of weeks without rest, Clara made a silent vow. She would protect him. No one, not even Eli, was going to carry this weight alone. From that night on, Clara began to change. No longer just the one needing protection, she became the protector, standing guard over Eli's heart and well-being. She started pushing herself harder during her rehabilitation, not just for her own recovery, but for Eli's peace of mind. Every time he looked at her, Clara could see the love and concern in his eyes, and every time she saw that, it only fueled her desire to be strong again. She would be whole, not only for herself but for him, because she couldn't stand to see him suffering when he had already done so much. But Clara's protection didn't just come from her healing. She made it clear to those around her that Eli was off limits, that no one would use him, take advantage of his kindness, or make him feel like he wasn't enough. She spoke up for him when others didn't. She began to fight for him, even if that meant risking her own comfort. She became more vocal, standing up to her family, who had always seen Eli as just the help, and demanding that he be treated with respect and dignity. At one point, Clara overheard a conversation between her father and some of his business associates, all of them dismissing Eli's presence, calling him just a street kid with no future. Clara's chest tightened as the words cut through her like a knife. No one would speak of Eli that way, not while she had breath in her lungs. In that moment, her protective instincts flared. She marched into the room, her voice cold but filled with a determination that surprised even her. "Don't you ever speak of him that way again," Clara said firmly, her eyes locked on her father. "Eli is not just some boy from the street. He's a person with a heart and a soul. Someone who has given more than anyone ever has for me. So if you want to keep your job, your power, or your reputation in this house, you will treat him with the respect he deserves." Her father looked stunned, but Clara wasn't done. She continued to stand her ground, her voice unwavering. She made sure Eli was never disrespected again, even when it meant going against her own family. Eli, for his part, watched Clara's transformation with growing awe. He had never imagined that this fragile, quiet girl, the one who had once been so helpless, would turn into someone so fiercely determined, someone who could protect him with the same passion and intensity that he had once shown for her. His heart swelled with gratitude, but a part of him couldn't help but feel guilty for the toll his struggles had taken on her. But Clara wouldn't have it. She refused to let him carry the burden anymore, and as Clara's body grew stronger, so did her resolve. She didn't just want to walk again. She wanted to stand tall beside Eli. She wanted to show him that the love and sacrifice he had given her would not go unnoticed, would not go in vain. She would be strong again, not just for herself, but for him. Every day, as she took each new step, Clara felt herself becoming more determined, more fierce in her will to heal, not just physically, but emotionally. She felt herself becoming whole again, piece by piece, step by step. And she knew, deep down, that when the time came for Eli to finally see her standing, strong and healed, he would know, without a shadow of a doubt, that she had done it for them. Eli had always lived in the shadows of his own mistakes. It wasn't something he talked about, not to Clara, not to anyone. He had learned long ago that silence was easier than revealing the truth about the life he had lived before Clara, the choices he had made, and the guilt that haunted him like a shadow he couldn't outrun. It wasn't that Eli hadn't tried to be a good person. From the moment he first met Clara, he had tried to change, to be better. He had dedicated his life to her, to making her life better, to helping her walk again. But the weight of his past always hung around him, like an invisible chain, pulling him down every time he thought about it. He had done things in his past, things that made him feel unworthy of the love and care Clara had shown him. Things that made him feel like he wasn't enough for her, like he would never be able to escape the ghost of who he had once been. There were nights when he lay awake, staring at the ceiling of his small apartment, and thought about the people he had hurt, the mistakes he couldn't undo. Before he had found Clara, he had been just another lost kid on the streets, doing whatever it took to survive. The people he had hurt, those who had trusted him, he could never take back the pain. He had caused them. He had betrayed some, stolen from others, and worst of all, abandoned the ones who had cared for him when things got tough. The regret clawed at his heart every day, and yet despite all of that, Clara had given him a chance. She had seen him. Not the broken boy from the streets, not the boy who had hurt so many, but the man he could become. She had given him a new purpose, a reason to live beyond the shame of his past. But with that gift came an impossible weight. He wasn't sure if he deserved it. As Clara's condition improved, as she began to stand again and take those first wobbly steps, Eli's guilt grew heavier. How could he deserve this happiness when his past was filled with nothing but mistakes? How could he be the one to heal her when he had caused so much pain in his own life? One evening, while Clara was resting after her rehabilitation session, Eli found himself sitting in the small kitchen, a glass of water in his hands. His heart ached with the weight of everything he had done, everything he hadn't told her. There was a part of him that wanted to confess it all, to lay bare every regret he had. But something stopped him. He was scared that if he opened up, if he revealed the darkness of his past, she would see him as a failure, that she would see him as the person he had been, not the person he was trying to become. But then, The thought of losing her, the thought of Clara looking at him with pity, or worse, disappointment, struck him like a physical blow. No, he couldn't live with that. He couldn't bear the idea of not being worthy of her love. The next morning, after Clara's therapy session, Eli stood by the window, watching her smile as she took a few steps with the walker. His heart swelled with pride, but beneath that pride was the painful truth. He had to come clean. He had to let her know, because if he didn't, his soul would remain trapped in his past forever. Later that evening, as they sat together in their small living room, Eli finally found the courage to speak. His voice was shaky, his hands trembling, as he spoke the words that had been eating away at him for so long. "Clara," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "there's something I need to tell you. Something about my past that I should have told you a long time ago." Clara looked up, her expression soft, but her eyes were full of concern. "What is it, Eli?" For the first time in months, Eli allowed himself to truly feel the weight of his past, the weight of his regrets, and he spoke. He spoke about the mistakes he had made, about the people he had hurt, and the shame that had followed him all these years. He confessed everything, without holding anything back. "I don't deserve you," Eli said, tears welling up in his eyes. "I don't deserve your forgiveness. I don't deserve your love. But I will spend the rest of my life trying to make it right, trying to be someone worthy of you." Clara sat silently for a moment, her eyes locked on his. And then, slowly, she reached out, placing a hand on his cheek. "Eli," she said, her voice gentle but firm, "you don't need to be perfect. You don't need to fix everything from your past. What matters is that you're here now. You're here with me, and that's all I need. You're the one who's shown me what real strength is. You've healed me, and now we heal together." The words hit him like a tidal wave. Relief, gratitude, and the realization that despite his past, he was worthy of love. Clara's love. It was a redemption he hadn't thought possible, a second chance that he didn't deserve but would cherish forever. As the days passed, Eli began to heal, not just physically, but emotionally. He stopped carrying the burden of guilt and regret that had weighed him down for so long. He realized that redemption wasn't about erasing the past. It was about accepting it and choosing to move forward. Eli had found his purpose, his reason to live. It wasn't in his past, and it wasn't in the mistakes he had made. It was in Clara's eyes, in her love, in the chance to make a future together. And that, he realized, was redemption. Not in perfection, but in acceptance. In choosing to love, to heal, and to be a better man every day, Eli had come so far. He had healed Clara, helped her stand when the doctors had all but given up hope. The healing process was long, painful, and challenging, but every day, Clara's steps became more certain. However, beneath that outward success, there was an unsettling fear creeping up on him, a fear that Clara, his one true love, might never fully be free of the consequences of the accident. Despite Clara's progress, the doctors warned him that her recovery might be slow, that she might face setbacks that could leave her physically and emotionally scarred forever. Deep down, Eli knew Clara had her own silent battles, fears that she never voiced, but they were both struggling. It was on one of those long, sleepless nights, where every creak of the apartment seemed amplified, that Eli overheard Clara talking to her mother on the phone. He stood in the dark corner of the room listening quietly. His heart clenched as Clara's voice wavered, full of vulnerability. "Mom, I'm not sure I can do this anymore," she said, barely audible. "I feel so weak, so lost. What if I never walk again? What if I'm a burden to Eli? I don't want to hold him back." Eli felt his breath catch in his throat. It was one of those rare moments when he realized how deep Clara's fears went, how much of her own battle she had kept hidden from him. This was the same woman who had fought for her life, who had stood up against everything the world had thrown at her. But now, when faced with the prospect of not being fully healed, she was drowning in doubt. What could he do to help her? Eli had faced challenges of his own, survived the streets, and learned to trust no one, not even himself. But Clara had changed him. She had become his anchor, his reason to keep fighting. And now, she was slipping away into the dark thoughts that had once consumed him. He needed to bring her back. He needed to find a way to inspire her, to remind her of the strength that he knew was deep within her. The next day, Clara went for her rehabilitation session, her therapist encouraging her to take a few more steps. Eli sat in the waiting room, anxiety gnawing at him. He knew the stakes had never been higher. He had already given so much, his heart, his soul, his purpose. But this was different. He couldn't afford to lose her, not now. As Clara struggled to take a few more steps, her body trembling with exertion, Eli couldn't bear it any longer. He stormed into the therapy room, his eyes locked on hers, the urgency in his gaze unspoken. He knew this moment could either break them or make them stronger. "Clara," he called, his voice louder than it should have been. "You have to keep going. You're stronger than this. You are stronger than any of this." Clara paused, her foot halfway to the ground, but her gaze never wavered from Eli's. For a moment, the world around them seemed to freeze. It was as if time itself was holding its breath. "I don't know if I can do it, Eli," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I'm scared. Scared." The word hit Eli like a punch to the gut. It was the same fear that had haunted him his entire life. The fear of failing, the fear of not being good enough, the fear of losing everything. But now, for the first time, Eli realized that fear could be transformed into something powerful. Fear didn't have to break you. It could drive you. And right now, he needed to be that driving force for Clara. Without thinking, Eli crossed the room in a few long strides. He cupped her face in his hands, forcing her to look into his eyes. "I know you're scared. I'm scared too. But look at what you've already done. Look at how far you've come. You have everything inside you to keep going. You don't need to be perfect, Clara. You just need to keep moving, step by step, and I'll be here every single step of the way." His words were raw, honest, and filled with emotion. Clara's eyes softened, tears beginning to well up, but the faintest spark of determination flickered behind them. She looked down at her feet, then back at him. Eli could see the shift, the transition from doubt to belief, from fear to courage. It wasn't an immediate change, but in that moment, something in her clicked. The fire inside her, the one he had always seen, the one he had always admired, began to rekindle. With a deep breath, Clara took a shaky step forward, and then another. It wasn't graceful, it wasn't perfect, but it was progress. She wasn't giving up. She wasn't letting the weight of her fears define her. And in that moment, Eli realized something he had been blind to before. Clara's strength wasn't just in her body, it was in her heart. Together, they walked the road of recovery. Every day, Clara took one more step, and Eli was there, every step of the way. It was more than just physical healing, it was emotional, mental, and spiritual. They were healing each other, growing stronger together, and discovering the power of love, faith, and determination. The journey ahead was uncertain, but the one thing Eli knew for sure was that Clara would keep moving. She would keep fighting. And so would he. The final chapter of their journey, after so many obstacles and emotional storms, was where everything that had been building over the past months finally reached its peak. The battle wasn't just physical anymore. It had transcended the boundaries of what Clara's body could do. The healing had become a profound transformation of her soul, of Eli's, and of their love for one another. Eli and Clara sat together on a bench overlooking the sprawling city, a city that seemed so vast, yet so small when compared to what they had conquered. Clara's healing had exceeded anyone's expectations. Doctors had given her a bleak prognosis, but each day she proved them wrong. And now, months after the accident, she was on the verge of something extraordinary. But what lay beyond that? Physical recovery? What would happen once the battle for Clara's body was over? As Clara stared at the horizon, the light of the setting sun casting a warm glow over her face, Eli took her hand. For a moment, everything was silent. The soft rustle of the wind, the distant hum of traffic, the sound of their steady breathing. It all faded away, leaving only them in this moment of realization. "I never thought I'd get here, Clara," said quietly, the weight of her voice hinting at the emotions she had carried in secret. "I was so lost in the dark. I couldn't see the way out." Eli squeezed her hand, his voice low, but filled with a certainty that reflected his own clarity. "You found your way out, Clara, and so did I. We've both come through so much, but we're here now, together." Clara looked up at him, her eyes softening as she let out a slow, measured breath. "I kept thinking I had to do it all alone, that I had to heal myself on my own. But I couldn't have done it without you, Eli. You saved me in more ways than one." Eli smiled, his eyes glistening with a mixture of pride and love. "You didn't need to do it alone. I was always here from the moment I saw you, even when I couldn't admit it to myself. We heal together." The truth of those words hung between them, filled with all the pain and triumph of their shared experiences. The road had been long, and it hadn't been easy. There had been days when neither of them knew if they could go on, but in the end they had. They had walked through the fire and emerged on the other side, stronger and more connected than they had ever been. Clara stood up, a bit unsteady at first, but this time it wasn't fear that held her back. It was the overwhelming strength that had built up inside her. She had made it. She had become the woman she had always hoped to be. The woman who could stand tall, proud, and confident, not in spite of the darkness, but because of it. "Look at me," Clara said, her voice almost a whisper, but the conviction in it was undeniable. "I'm standing." Eli stood too, his heart pounding in his chest, but his expression calm. "You always had it in you, Clara. You always had the strength to stand. It just took time for you to see it." They stood there for a moment, together, their silhouettes, framed by the last light of the day. It wasn't just about Clara's body healing, it was about her spirit. It was about the clarity that had come with facing her fears head-on, accepting her vulnerability, and then, slowly but surely, turning that vulnerability into something greater than herself. Clara's journey had begun with uncertainty. She had been fragile, broken, and unsure of herself. But now, standing next to Eli, with the world spread out before them, she knew her future was no longer clouded with doubt. There was hope, a bright, undeniable hope, that stretched endlessly in front of her. Eli had been her anchor, the one who believed in her when she couldn't. But now Clara had her own strength. It wasn't the kind of strength that came from pushing away pain or fear. It was the kind that came from embracing it, learning from it, and allowing it to fuel her. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, Clara took a deep breath, ready to face whatever was ahead. She was not the same person who had been lost in the darkness. She was stronger, more aware, more alive. And Eli, standing beside her, knew that whatever they faced in the future, they would face it together. In this final moment of clarity and hope, the focus is not just on physical healing, but the emotional, spiritual, and relational transformation that both Eli and Clara undergo. The themes of strength, resilience, and the power of shared love dominate the conclusion. Clara's victory is not just her own, but a testament to their partnership. Hope is the guiding force. Not the kind of hope that ignores struggle, but the kind that acknowledges pain and chooses to rise above it. This is a victory forged in vulnerability, perseverance, and unconditional love, a love that transcends the struggles and defines their future. The story ends with the affirmation that no matter how dark the road may seem, there is always a light waiting to guide you back to yourself.